A blank blue envelope. No name, no return address. Just silence wrapped in paper. But in the right hands, even silence can speak volumes and lead straight to murder. This is a tale of deception dressed as stationery, of guilt written between the lines, and of a mind sharp enough to read what wasn't written at all. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Let me know in the comments. Settle in, because this mystery begins now. When Nero Wolfe voluntarily leaves the brownstone, you start checking the weather, the stock market, and whether the moon is still orbiting in the correct direction. That Thursday morning, after his ritual appointment with the orchids and a 10-minute silent meditation over his breakfast eggs, scrambled with sherry, courtesy of Fritz, he shuffled into the office wearing a brown fedora I didn't know he owned. "I am going to Hammerschmidt's," he said. I was halfway through my coffee and almost choked. "What for? A funeral?" "For paper," he said. "The fool Fritz purchased a wretched substitute. I require £30 ivory stock with deckled edges." "You're going out," I said, pointing to the door as if he'd forgotten what that meant. "Yes, Archie. You may accompany me or remain here playing jacks." So I grabbed my coat and followed him, mostly because the last time Wolfe went outdoors by choice, a guy got murdered, and I hate reruns. Hammerschmidt's Fine Papers is the kind of place where people go to buy apologies that cost more than the original offence. Mahogany shelves, calligraphy displays, and a clerk who looked like he had inherited his scowl from a long line of disappointments. Wolfe made a beeline for the Italian parchment like a man approaching sacred ground, leaving me to fend off the clerk, who was already raising an eyebrow at my shoes. "I require crane's crest, ivory, £30, Wolfe intoned, ignoring the man's expression the way a general ignores mosquitoes. "We have the 24, sir. The 30's been out of stock since June." Wolfe frowned like he'd been asked to drink domestic beer. "Unacceptable." They parried for 5 minutes over linen percentages, watermark placement, and, no joke, fibre tooth. I leaned on a glass display case filled with embossed sympathy cards and tried not to stab myself with the letter opener just to end it all. Eventually, Wolfe relented with a grumble and a substitute, while I kept an eye on the other customer, an older man with a limp who had been browsing envelopes with the intensity of a code breaker. I didn't know then I'd be seeing his handiwork again. Back home, Wolfe handed the white and gold Hammerschmidt's bag to
Fritz, like it was full of radioactive snakes. Then he plodded back into the office, plopped into his chair, and began peeling away tissue paper like a man unwrapping bad news. 3 boxes. 2 were what he
expected. Substandard but passable paper. The third was wrapped differently, with a faded navy band. He lifted the lid, grunted, and pulled out a blue envelope, one I distinctly recalled not being on the menu. "What's that?" I asked, moving to his side. Wolfe didn't answer immediately. He held it up, sniffed once, and opened it with a silver blade. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded with mechanical neatness. No watermark, no monogram. He unfolded it. That was Wolfe's version of a drum roll. I reached for it, but he passed it over without a word. One look, and I felt my spine stiffen like it had hit ice water. 6 names, handwritten in blue ink. No title, no context. But one of those names, Russell Keene, rang a bell, and not the friendly kind. "Wolfe," I said, "you sure this wasn't in Fritz's scrambled eggs?" "I know names. It's one of the hazards of working with Nero Wolfe and sharing oxygen with the likes of Inspector Kramer. And Russell Keene, 4th name on the list, had made headlines last year when he supposedly swan-dived off his penthouse balcony after a little misunderstanding with the SEC. I read the other 5 names aloud: Anthony Bresson, Carl Drexler, Vivian Elrod, Desmond Chase, and Marlene Van. and got nothing but the faint itch behind my ear that usually means somebody's lying or I'm about to get punched. "Where do you suppose this came from?" I asked. "I did not purchase it," Wolfe said flatly. "It is either a clerical error or intentional misplacement." I didn't buy either. The envelope didn't smell like a mistake. It smelled like a fuse. I copied the names into my notebook, folded the original back up, and slipped it into the bottom drawer of my desk. Wolfe was already leaning back, eyes closed, fingers drumming his chair arm. He wasn't done thinking. But I was already starting to. The dead man on the list was bad enough. It was the 5 living ones I was worried about. By mid-afternoon, Wolfe had retreated upstairs to tend to his orchids, leaving me to twiddle my thumbs, or, as I prefer, dig up dirt. Fritz hovered like a nervous housekeeper with a broken vase. He seemed unsettled, Fritz murmured over my shoulder. "Wolfe?" I said. "No, that's his version of jazz hands." Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. That envelope hadn't been slipped in by accident. And 6 names without context, one of them dead? That's not a prank. It's an invitation. So I picked one. Carl Drexler. A commodities broker, last I knew. Still living in the city, still billing clients for losses dressed as gains. I dialed his office. His secretary said he'd left for the day but might return after 6. I said I'd swing by, which earned me a sour look from Wolfe when I popped my head into the plant room. "Don't get murdered," he muttered. "Wouldn't dream of it," I said. I pocketed my notebook, adjusted my tie, and headed out. I didn't have a theory yet, but I had a name, a time, and the kind of gut feeling you don't ignore, unless you like surprises with sharp edges. When I got back, Wolfe was in his chair, sipping beer and pretending he didn't care I'd been gone 2 hours. I dropped the news on him like a waiter with a bad tray balance. No dice with Drexler. His receptionist looked like she'd just come off a 6-day hangover, and the man himself wasn't talking. But guess what? His office used to handle risk assessment for Blue Harbor Capital. That got Wolfe's eyebrow twitching, which for him is the equivalent of a gasp. "Also," I added, "you're going to love this. Bresson and Keene both served on Blue Harbor's board before it folded." He leaned forward. "That envelope," he said slowly, "was not a mistake. It was planted." "Yeah, and now we're the ones holding it." He didn't reply. He reached over, picked up the blue envelope, and turned it in his hands like it might confess. Then he opened it again, checked the list, and grunted. "We must determine who benefits from these names being exposed, if they are, indeed, still alive." "They were this morning," I said. "Tomorrow's a whole different gamble." And that was the moment I knew this case had teeth, and we were already in its mouth. She came in wearing mink, heels, and the kind of perfume that makes you remember math class wrong. Her name, she said, was Marlena Van, and the name alone sounded like it had been embroidered on checks large enough to make a banker blush. She sat with the glide of someone used to good furniture and worse people. Wolfe didn't look up right away. He was engrossed in pruning a paragraph from a French translation of Horace. But her voice, cool, low, and just a notch above faint, wasn't the kind you ignored. "I'm here because someone thinks I'm easy to scare," she said. Wolfe glanced at her like she was interrupting something less vulgar than life. "Then by all means, madam, you must disabuse them." I offered her coffee, which she declined, and a chair, which she accepted. She crossed her legs and folded her hands like a woman balancing a secret on each finger. I could tell she wasn't sure if we were wolves or sheepdogs, but either way, she was hoping one of us bit back. She got to it without a sob or a cigarette, which, frankly, I appreciated. "The first letter arrived 6 weeks ago," she said. "Typed, no signature, a list of names and a line that said, 'You know what happened.'" Wolfe finally closed the book. That was his version of a gasp. Marlene went on. "At first, I thought it was a prank. Then another came. This time, the language was more pointed. 'What your husband did won't stay buried.' Still unsigned." I asked if she'd kept them. She had. She passed over 2 crisp sheets of creamy paper, folded with the kind of care you don't give to junk mail. The type was clean, aligned, probably done on a decent machine. Wolfe didn't touch them. He looked at me instead. "The police?" I asked. She shook her head. "They'd laugh me out the door." Wolfe arched a brow. "Then you are fortunate, madam, that I am not burdened by that particular reflex." She didn't smile. I had to give her credit. She was either incredibly brave or incredibly stubborn, and judging by her tailored cuffs, maybe both. "The names," she said, tapping the corner of the second letter, "were all men from a company called Blue Harbor Capital." I didn't flinch. Wolfe didn't blink. But I felt the temperature drop 2 degrees. "Blue Harbor?" I repeated. She nodded. "It was my husband's firm, years ago. Boutique finance, high-risk funds. It collapsed 5 years ago, quietly. They made sure of that." "Who's they?" I asked. "Whoever sent these." I reached into the desk drawer, pulled out the blue envelope we'd stashed the day before, and spread the list of names next to the letter she'd brought. 4 names overlapped. Wolfe made a low sound, something between a grunt and a sigh. "Remarkable," he said. "Not the coincidence, the restraint." I said, "Mrs. Van, your husband, he wasn't involved in anything ornamental, was he?" She didn't blink. "My husband was many things. Modest wasn't one of them." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Wolfe's fingers steepled. He was starting to smell rot beneath the cologne, and I was starting to see how deep Blue Harbor's ghost still ran. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a check already filled out for $10,000. She placed it on the table like a poker chip. Calm, elegant, lethal. Wolfe didn't so much as glance at it. He turned his head slightly, studying her with that basilisk gaze that's made tougher men than me squirm. "You wish me to identify the author of these letters?" he asked. "I want it stopped," she replied. "I don't care how." "Careless language," he said, "but instructive." She leaned forward just slightly. "Mr. Wolfe, money isn't the issue." "Clearly," he said, nodding toward the check. That was his way of saying he'd take the case. I knew the signs. He was hooked. Not by the zeros, but by the scent of a mystery dressed in deception and guilt, the kind that fed his intellect the way Fritz's quenelles fed his belly. I collected the check. Wolfe finally looked at it once, then waved a hand like dismissing a child's drawing. But I knew. The trap had already been baited, and the spider was stretching his legs. Wolfe settled into his chair and went into one of those quiet spells where you could almost hear his brain shifting gears. Marlene Van sipped the water Fritz had brought in, crystal glass, no lemon, and looked at me like I might be the one who actually said things out loud. So I did. "Funny thing," I said, casually retrieving the blue envelope from the desk again. "This arrived in our package from Hammerschmidt's yesterday. Someone tucked it into Wolfe's paper order." I placed it gently in front of her. She stared at it like it might bite. "I recognize the style," she said, "but I've never seen that envelope." Her hand hovered a moment before pulling back. Wolfe didn't speak. His eyes were half-lidded, like a cat pretending to nap while planning a murder. "It seems," I said, Someone wants a certain circle of people to feel watched. Her shoulders tightened, just slightly, but enough. Wolfe opened one eye. "It's possible," he murmured, "that the author of your letters wishes to observe who reacts and how swiftly." Marlene Van didn't answer that, and I didn't press, because I already had one dead man on the list. I wasn't eager to add a second. Wolfe dictated the terms. No police interference unless legally required. Total discretion. Payment on completion. Marlene Van agreed with a grace that came from decades of brushing away contract clauses like lint. Fritz brought in tea, rose petal blend, a new experiment, and Wolfe ignored it. That told me more than the check had. "I shall begin with the list," he said. "The names. You will, of course, provide any additional documents, records, correspondence, personal effects that may illuminate context." "I will," she said. "I will also require," he added, "a brief character sketch of each man you can recall, habits, reputations, loyalties." She nodded. "I can start that now." I got out a fresh pad. While she talked, Wolfe sat in silence, only breaking in to ask the occasional pointed question. The kind that makes a person rethink their answers before they're even halfway through giving them. By the time she left, the sun had gone down and the office smelled faintly of orchids, rose tea, and danger. I watched her walk to the cab, then turned back to Wolfe. He was already rising. "Where to?" I asked. "The plant rooms," he said, "and do not disturb me." Which meant one thing. Wolfe's mind was already chewing the bait, and by the look in his eye, he was starting to taste blood. The list had 6 names, 2 of which Wolfe was already poking at, like they owed him money. I took it as my cue to start connecting dots, or, in this case, ghosts, financial corpses, and people with the kind of money that doesn't sleep well at night. You'd think tracking down 6 names would be easy in Manhattan. But these weren't barflies or bagmen. These were people who didn't answer phones, used 3 attorneys for lunch reservations, and could make a lawsuit disappear faster than Fritz's Bernays. I started with the obvious, a quick check of public records, the better gossip columns, and a couple of old acquaintances who owed me favors I hadn't yet cashed in. The one thing they all had in common, besides the fact that their names were on our mysterious guest list, was Blue Harbor Capital, that elegant financial sinkhole that had folded 5 years ago with less noise than a tired sigh. Only now, someone wanted those names looked at again, and if the list was bait, I was already chewing. Next on my dance card, a little club where financiers drink brandy and whisper the truth to each other's cufflinks. The Arundel Finance Club sits in a limestone building near Madison and 70th. It has 3 doormen, 2 antique elevators, and 1 rule: no press, no cops, no cameras. In other words, my kind of place, assuming I had a tuxedo and an expense account that didn't bounce. Fortunately, I had charm, credentials, and an introduction from a friend of a friend who owed Wolfe a favor involving a Panamanian merger and a senator's second cousin. Inside, the club was hushed and brown, leather chairs, overpriced scotch, and art that looked like it had been stolen from the Louvre, then beaten with a mallet. The bartender poured with the precision of a surgeon and the discretion of a monk. I got one of the older members to loosen up with a sidecar and some low-stakes flattery. When I mentioned Russell Keene, his lips pursed like he'd swallowed a lemon. "Dreadful business," he muttered. "Window dive, Park Avenue. He wasn't the same after Blue Harbor tanked." I asked if he thought it was suicide. He gave me a look like I'd asked if champagne had calories. "No one falls 12 stories with their tie still straight, son." Which meant I needed to find someone who knew what had twisted it. If Russell Keene took the swan dive, Anthony Bresson did the vanishing act. No forwarding address, no new company, no digital footprints, just a trail of unpaid dry cleaning bills and a penthouse that had been rented out to a Pilates instructor. I visited the building manager, who claimed Bresson had left town suddenly. I asked if that town had a name. He shrugged and offered me a maintenance key and a warning about the smell. The apartment was still staged like a financial fairy tale: designer furniture, minimalist art, a liquor cabinet that could pay off student loans. But there was dust, unopened mail, and a definite funk of abandonment, like someone had run out of the place and never looked back. I found a stash of personal letters in a drawer, mostly dull, until I hit one from Vivian Elrod, asking if the Zurich thing had really happened, or if he was just paranoid. That earned a photo on my phone and a note in my pad. Bresson didn't look dead, just cleverly missing, which made me think he knew something worth hiding for. And that meant the list wasn't just a record, it was a trigger. Carl Drexler operated out of a tall, sterile glass building near Wall Street, where the lobby smelled like lemon polish and regret. I got buzzed up by a receptionist who looked like she measured time in dismissive glances. Drexler greeted me
with the warmth of a loan shark in a recession. He was lean, tanned, and wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my car.
"What do you want?" he said flatly, before I'd even sat down. "Conversation. About Blue Harbor." His nostrils flared like I'd slapped him with a subpoena. "That's over. Dead. Like a lot of things." I smiled. "That's funny. I have a list that says otherwise." His eyes narrowed. "You need to leave." "I haven't even asked about Russell Keene." I said. He stood up. I stood too, quickly. He wasn't tall, but he had the energy of a man who'd buried more than one bad deal. "You want advice?" he said, voice low. "Let dead companies stay dead. Some graves pay better closed." I didn't answer, just gave him a nod and walked out. The kind of nod that says, "You just told me everything, pal. You just don't know it yet." Vivian Elrod met me at a cafe in Soho that had more types of milk than I have neckties. She was smart, stylish, and spoke in crisp, measured tones, like someone who'd grown up learning how to phrase guilt as elegance. "Anthony," she said when I mentioned Bresson. "We dated, years ago. He was brilliant and exhausting." Her hands never stopped moving. Teacup, napkin, necklace, then back again. I let her talk, while I watched the way her eyes didn't quite settle. "Did he ever mention Zurich?" I asked. That got a pause. Her fingers stilled for exactly 3 seconds before the smile rebooted. "Not to me." "Funny. He had a letter from you." She sipped her tea. "He worried, he always worried, about people, about trust, and about Blue Harbor." She leaned back, crossed her legs, and gave me a look that could freeze bourbon. That fund should have never existed, and I shouldn't have helped build it. I slid the blue envelope across the table. She glanced once, then looked away. "I'm late." She left quickly. I didn't follow, because sometimes you don't chase someone who's already running from themselves. By the time I got back to the brownstone, I had 3 names linked to Blue Harbor: one ghost, one corpse, and one analyst who smiled like she was hiding behind it. Wolfe was, predictably, upstairs communing with orchids, leaving me to sort notes and files while Fritz banged pots in the kitchen with dramatic flair. I gave the envelope a fresh read. 6 names, tied together by something that sank too neatly to be just bad business. Blue Harbor didn't just fail, it disappeared. The SEC sniffed at it once, then shuffled off. No lawsuits, no press storm, just silence, which, in this town, is the loudest alarm there is. I started running financial threads, shell companies, off-record loans. All of it led to nothing, or rather, to too much nothing. That's when I knew. Someone hadn't just closed the book on Blue Harbour. They'd torn out the index and buried the typewriter. And yet, someone had sent the envelope. Someone wanted it opened. Wolfe finally appeared, wiping his hands with a cloth he probably hadn't bought himself in 20 years. "Your expression is unpleasant," he said. "That's because it matches the case," I replied. "And I think we've just stirred something that's been happily dead for 5 years." His reply? Just one word. Good. I've never been a big fan of breakfast headlines, especially when they feature someone I saw alive less than 12 hours prior. That morning's Gazette had a photo of Carl Drexler's building above the fold, alongside a headline that used the word brutal twice in the same sentence. According to the article, Drexler was found by his night secretary, stabbed in his office, no signs of forced entry, nothing missing, just one dead commodities broker with a short fuse and a shorter life expectancy. Wolfe didn't comment when I laid the paper on his desk. He scanned the article with the same expression he uses for bad hollandaise. "He warned me," I said, "told me to drop it." "And you did not," Wolfe replied. "I'm not in the habit of taking financial advice from sweating liars." Wolfe closed the paper with precision. "Nor am I, but now we are accessory, if only in curiosity." I opened my mouth to make a wisecrack, but was interrupted by the bell. A ring that long, that early, and that angry could only mean one thing. "Kramer," I said. Wolfe merely grunted. It might have been agreement or indigestion. Inspector Kramer entered like a man looking for a nail to hammer and hoping we'd do nicely. He didn't wait to be invited. He brushed past Fritz at the door and charged straight into the office, hat still on, trench coat flaring like a magician mid-rant. "Drexel!" he barked. "What the hell were you doing with him last night?" Wolfe was at his desk, mid-sip of beer, which he lowered with a little more ceremony than usual. "Good morning, Inspector." Kramer slapped the Gazette down on the desk. "You knew him. You met with him. Now he's got a knife in his chest, and his secretary says you were sniffing around." "That is an imprecise characterization," Wolfe said calmly. "Then make it precise." I sat back, enjoying the show. "We didn't kill him, Kramer," I offered helpfully. "And we didn't sell him the knife." Kramer turned to me. "You think this is funny?" "No. I think it's standard operating procedure for you to yell first and check facts never." Wolfe raised a finger. "If you're here to accuse, Inspector, you require more than volume." Kramer glared. "I'll be back," he growled. "And I'm bringing questions you won't smirk through." I didn't smirk, until he left. Once Kramer left, the atmosphere deflated like a souffle punched in the middle. Fritz brought in coffee, mine black, Wolfe's with cream and passive judgment. "I take it," I said, "you'd like me to compile my notes?" "I would," Wolfe said, "and without embellishment." I saluted. One honest account of Drexler's visible sweat and hidden warnings coming right up. Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. He could have passed for napping if you didn't know better. But I did. That posture meant his brain was cartwheeling through timelines, motives, and the shape of the knife. I jotted down everything I'd gathered from Drexler's office, the dodged questions, the sudden panic, the veiled threat. Wolfe remained silent until I finished. Was there anything in his tone that suggested fear for himself or another? Fear for himself. Definitely. He wasn't trying to save anyone but his own skin. Wolfe opened his eyes. Then his death is consequence, not collateral. I slid the pad across the desk, which puts us in line behind a body. He took a long, slow breath. No. Ahead of one. It wasn't just deduction. It was a warning. And I didn't like the direction it pointed. Wolfe wasn't one for melodrama, but the look he gave the blue envelope as he pulled it from the drawer was the closest he's ever come to calling something cursed. He held it like it might detonate. "This," he said, was not misfiled. It was not misdelivered. It was planted. I nodded. Yeah, but why us? Why not? Wolfe said, tone dry. We are ideally situated, curious, resourced, independent, and already possessing a reputation for digging into rot. He laid the envelope on the desk and stared at it like it had insulted his lineage. It is not an invitation. It is a provocation. To do what? Chase ghosts? He arched a brow. To observe reactions. Who panics? Who vanishes? Who dies? That shut me up for a second. Fritz, who'd returned to clear the tray, muttered something about cold soup and vanished back to the kitchen. I believe, Wolfe said, we are being used as a litmus, a catalyst. The envelope is not bait for us, it is a trigger for others. Which means, I said, whoever sent it is watching. Wolfe nodded. And they will continue until something bites. Well, something had, and the blood was still fresh. When Wolfe decides a case has teeth, he calls Saul Panzer. And when Saul gets the nod, you know the gloves are officially off. Have him come, Wolfe said. I made the call. Saul arrived inside 20 minutes. Brushed coat, no nonsense, and a notebook fatter than my ego on payday. Wolfe wasted no time. The envelope, he said. Trace it. Not the contents, the object, the paper, its packaging, the means of delivery, who handled it and when. Saul raised an eyebrow. You want a provenance on stationery? Wolfe nodded. Precisely. I am convinced it was inserted with intent. Intent leaves evidence. I added, we picked it up at Hammerschmidt's with some ivory bond. Wolfe didn't notice it till we got home. Saul made a note. Did anyone handle the package before you left? Clark, man with a limp standing nearby. Could have been the swapper. Wolfe tapped the desk. Discreet inquiries. No interference. No police. Saul, being Saul, just nodded and left. Wolfe folded his hands and stared out the window. We will soon know whether we were chosen randomly or deliberately. Let me guess, I said. You're betting deliberate. Always, he replied. And this time I wasn't about to argue. Carl Drexler was dead. Russell Keane was already long gone. Bresson was missing. That left 3 names on the list. Desmond Chase, Marlene Vann, and Vivian Elrod. I was beginning to feel like someone had sent us a countdown, and we'd missed the first 2 chimes. Wolfe, I said, pacing the office, this isn't just some creepy prank. This is a hit list. He didn't argue. He rarely does when I'm right. Drexel warned me off. Then he got perforated. If that envelope wasn't for us, it was meant to spark someone else. And someone sparked all right, with a blade. Wolfe grunted. It is not about punishment. It is about containment. Containment? He steepled his fingers. Something within that group is a liability. Financial, legal, reputational. And someone is removing liabilities before they become witnesses. And we're the matchstick that lit the trail. Indeed. I glanced at the list again. That makes the next name a target. Or bait, Wolfe said. It wasn't comforting. I'd prefer being bait in a chess game, not a butcher's shop. And somewhere out there, someone else had the same list, only they were holding it in one hand and a knife in the other. It was 9:05 in the morning, which by Wolfe's clock is practically uncivilized, when the front doorbell rang like someone had taken it personally. Fritz cracked it, then cracked under it. Inspector Kramer pushed through with the grace of a charging rhino and brandished a folded sheet of paper like it owed him rent. I brought a warrant this time, he growled. Congratulations, I said. Did they finally teach you how to spell your own name? Kramer didn't even glance my way. He marched straight into the office and slapped the warrant on Wolfe's desk like a winning hand at poker. You've got records, notes, correspondence. We want it. Wolfe, to his credit, barely sighed. You are not permitted to rifle through this house like a rodent. State your purpose and your scope, and I shall comply within reason. Carl Drexler's murder, Kramer barked. You were involved, at least indirectly. I was not, Wolfe said, but I am entangled by design. Kramer narrowed his eyes. That's supposed to mean something. Eventually, Wolfe replied. I leaned back. This was shaping up to be one of those mornings where I didn't need coffee to stay awake. By the time Kramer left, still steaming but a little less combustible, Saul Panzer was already on the stoop with his findings, and a new wrinkle in our already wrinkled week. He followed me into the office, nodded at Wolfe, and dropped a slim folder onto the desk. You were right, he said. The package from Hammerschmidt's? Switched. Wolfe nodded. Deliberately? Like a magician. Saul opened the file. Their clerk said a man with a cane bumped into him while reaching for a display. During the confusion, the order labels shifted. Describe him, I said. Tall, late 50s, sharp overcoat, walked like he'd earned the limp. Military? Wolfe asked. Could be. The posture fits, but the eyes, those weren't regulation. Wolfe leaned back and steepled his fingers. And what of the envelope? Unique? Custom run, not from Hammerschmidt's usual stock. That envelope was meant for you, or for whoever picked up the package. I whistled. So someone rigged the delivery to get a reaction. Exactly, Saul said. And they're watching for it. Wolfe closed the folder. Then it is our turn to respond, precisely and without warning. Which meant someone out there was about to wish they'd mailed a postcard instead. Desmond Chase had a corner office in a midtown skyscraper that reeked of polish, pressure, and overpriced coffee. The receptionist looked like she moonlighted as a glacier. She didn't offer a smile when I dropped Wolfe's name, just a buzz through and a stiff nod toward a frosted glass door. Chase opened it himself. Trim, silver-streaked, eyes like steel-tipped drills. He offered me a handshake firm enough to file taxes on. Mr. Goodwin. A pleasure, I'm sure, he said. You'll let me know when it is, I said, walking in. His office had leather, glass, and zero personality. Not a family photo in sight, not even a wilted ficus. Blue Harbour, I said. He paused at the liquor cart, eyebrows lifting. Now there's a name I thought I'd buried. I didn't blink. Some people are digging it up. He handed me a drink I didn't ask for, and sat. You're not police. That makes you either dangerous or decorative. Sometimes both, I said. His lips twitched, but not into a smile. If you want advice, it's this. Let dead funds stay dead. And Drexler? The smile vanished. Tragic, he said, but predictable. Some people never leave well enough alone. I left, thinking Chase wasn't rattled. He was ready. And that was worse. Back at the brownstone, the kitchen smelled like heaven had been slow roasted and basted in garlic. Fritz was humming something Viennese while spooning duck fat over a bird that looked like it had been painted by a French impressionist. Dinner? I asked. Duck à l'orange, he said, with the kind of pride that could start wars. Wolfe was seated at the dining room table, not in his usual slouch, but upright, holding a notebook. He wasn't making notes. He was just staring at it like it had said something impolite. Fritz, he said, this case is absurd. Oui, monsieur, Fritz said, whisking sauce with extra defiance. It is too silent, too symmetrical, A true conspiracy is riddled with chaos. This has none. Maybe it's tidy because someone meant it that way, I offered. Wolfe grunted. Precisely. We are not observing spontaneous behavior. We are observing choreography. The duck was perfect. The implications weren't. By dessert, Wolfe had gone quiet again, not brooding, calculating. And that always made me nervous. Digging through Blue Harbour's old financial records was like sorting lint. Grey, shapeless, and not especially charming. But I've done worse for less. It took a few hours and a favour from a friend at a trust company whose idea of subtlety involved cryptic footnotes and missing files, but I finally hit a lead, an offshore shell account in Geneva. The account was old school, coded transfers, layered trusts, and no direct ownership. But the money trail didn't lie. Blue Harbour had been quietly infused with Swiss funds 2 months before the collapse. Millions, unlabelled, unclaimed, and entirely silent. I brought the info back to Wolfe, who took it like it was a fine cognac, slowly, with narrowed eyes. Unattached money, he said. Perfect for bribes, or burying someone. Or both, I added. You think this ghost wallet is connected to the killings? I think, Wolfe said, someone wants very badly for no one to connect them at all. And if Wolfe was right, the money wasn't just suspicious, it was motive. And we'd just shoved our noses right into it. We were running out of names. And luck. Drexler was dead. Keane had dived. Bresson was off the grid. That left Chase, Elrod, and Marlene Van, who now ranked somewhere between concerned client and potentially next. Wolfe sat in his chair like a man whose calculations were a hair's breadth from checkmate. I paced, because if I didn't, I might start screaming. 3 left, I said. One's hiding, one's lying, and one's paying us. Wolfe sipped beer. And all 3 are reacting to the envelope. Yeah, and so far, 2 of those reactions ended with funerals. He nodded. Which means the sender is watching carefully. They require fear, movement, exposure. I tapped the list. It's a slaughter schedule. No, Wolfe said. It's a test. I stared at him. What kind of test includes knives and poison? A desperate one, he replied, to see who breaks, who betrays. And we're supposed to just watch. Wolfe set down his glass. We are not passive, Archie. We are participants. And soon, we will determine what part we are being made to play. Which, coming from Wolfe, was the closest thing to this might end badly I'd ever heard. I grabbed my coat. It was time to check the
next name. Vivian Elrod was supposed to meet me for coffee at 11:00 a.m. sharp. She seemed the punctual type, if not the chatty one. I picked a table at a spot in Midtown where the espresso was hot and the clientele wore more silk than conscience. By 11:20, I started watching the door. By 11:45, I was watching the clock. I gave her another 10 minutes, out of charm, not optimism, then made a call. The detective in me, professional and cynical, started the walk to her apartment with measured stride. The part of me that remembered her hands trembling when I said Zurich walked a little faster. I got there just as the coroner's van pulled up. She'd been found slumped near her kitchen table. No signs of struggle, no broken glass, no blood. Just a teacup, a half-eaten croissant, and a blue envelope, slit clean and lying like a guilty shrug beside a small amber bottle. Poison. Neat, silent, tidy. I stood in the doorway while the medical team moved past me, and I thought of the list, and how the dead weren't random. They were connected. And I had the horrible feeling they weren't done. The envelope was the same color, same size, same stock, and just like the one we'd received, no return address, no fingerprints, no contents worth reading. But the message screamed louder than type ever could. Vivian Elrod
had received her own blue envelope sometime that morning. She'd opened it, read it, or maybe not, and within an hour she was dead. It wasn't a letter, it was a verdict. I watched the coroner work while I slipped a photo of the envelope into my phone and kept my mouth shut. I could already hear Wolfe's voice in my head. "You do not touch what is not yours, Archie." And in this case, that included corpses. Still, I wasn't walking out of there without some kind of clue. I scanned her apartment again. Sparse. No signs of struggle. No mess. She'd either trusted whoever gave her the poison or accepted it like she was cashing in. I called Wolfe on the walk back. "She's dead," I said, and someone made sure the envelope was the last thing she saw. There was a long pause. "Come back," he said. "We must reassess our roles in this play." Which was Wolfe speak for "the killer knows we're watching." When I got back to the brownstone, something was off. Wolfe was at his desk, but not reading, dictating, or berating me for being late. No beer on his coaster, no snide remark about my tie, no evidence of Fritz either, which meant the kitchen was running quiet. A rare and unsettling phenomenon. He didn't speak. He just nodded when I entered, then resumed staring at the same spot on the rug like it owed him answers. I waited. When nothing came, I spoke. Vivian didn't stand a chance. Whoever did it didn't even leave a headline, just an empty envelope. Still no response. "Wolfe?" He finally turned his eyes on me. They weren't blank. They were calculating. "We are being manipulated, Archie. Controlled. Our reactions are part of a mechanism we do not yet see." I sat down. "Which makes us, what? Investigators? Or pawns?" "Both," he said. Then he went silent again. He didn't ask for beer. He didn't ask for lunch. He didn't even ask for the latest update from Saul. I've seen Wolfe rattled. It takes a bomb or a badly cooked quiche. But this was different. This was Wolfe when the trap is closing, and he doesn't yet know where the spring is. Fritz cornered me in the hall like a butler in a haunted house. "He didn't eat breakfast," he whispered. "He turned down lunch. He declined the pâté I made from my mother's recipe." "That's bad," I said. "Call the Vatican." Fritz wrung his hands. "Do you think it's his health or guilt?" "Neither," I said. "It's logic and fear." Back in the office, Wolfe hadn't moved. So naturally, that's when the envelope arrived. A plain manila square slid under the front door. I spotted it as I passed through the hall. No postage, just my name typed dead center. Inside was one sheet of paper, center justified, like a poem or a death threat. "You're next. Drop the envelope, or you'll drop something else. No signature, no blue this time, just black ink and menace." I showed it to Wolfe. He didn't flinch. He just said, "The author is escalating." "You think they're bluffing?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that someone has moved from deterrence to intimidation. That is a narrowing of options." Which meant somebody wanted me scared, and Wolfe hungry. They were going to get neither. When Inspector Kramer arrived that evening, he had two things with him, a grim face and a rain-soaked coat. He left the coat with Fritz and brought the face into the office like a personal storm cloud. "I figured you'd want the news straight from me," he said, dropping into the red chair like it owed him rent. Elrod, confirmed poison, traces of cyanide in her tea, no struggle, nothing stolen. Wolfe nodded. "She received a message?" Kramer shot me a look. I nodded. Another envelope, same brand, different color. Kramer snorted. "What is this? A greeting card killer?" "No," Wolfe said. "A chess player." Kramer shifted, annoyed. "You're not helping, Wolfe.
This is 2 bodies in 1 week, both linked to that damn fund. 3, Wolfe corrected. Russell Keene's suicide should be reconsidered. Kramer rubbed his face. So what? You think someone's cleaning house? Not cleaning, Wolfe replied. Disassembling. You're in the middle of it, Kramer said. Not above it. Don't forget that. Wolfe's expression didn't change, but I saw the twitch in his fingers, either from restraint or realization. Kramer stood. When you figure out who's next, try not to wait until they're already dead. I didn't say it aloud, but I had a hunch. He was talking about me. I sat at my desk, staring at the list. Russell Keene, dead last year. Carl Drexler, dead last week. Vivian Elrod, poisoned this morning. Anthony Bresson, still missing. Desmond Chase, simmering with secrets. Marlene Van, our client, and maybe the next name on someone's dinner menu. That left me wondering how long before one of those names got replaced with mine. Wolfe broke the silence.
The envelope was never meant to lead us to a killer. It was meant to monitor the herd. I looked up. You think the sender's been watching us? Yes. And watching them. Each death is a reaction, not a plan. It's like a chain of triggers. And we're pulling them? No, he said. We are being used to pull them. I stood. Then we need to flip the script. Wolfe's eyes lit, not with anger or fear, but with clarity. Correct. We must change from the observed to the observer. Any ideas? Yes, he said. Invite them in. I blinked. To the brownstone? He nodded. To the trap. And just like that, the game changed. Now we weren't chasing names. We were baiting one. When a woman dies mysteriously with a blue envelope on her kitchen table, and I'm the guy she stood up for coffee, I take it personally. So I started digging, not into her casket, but her calendar. Vivian Elrod had a taste for red wine, old jazz, and secrets. The first 2 were on her record shelf. The last was buried a little deeper. With a few phone calls and some gentle nudging, think brass knuckles made of charm, I turned up the name Anthony Bresson. Not from her address book, but from a long-forgotten lease she co-signed last year. So she had a history with our missing fund manager. That made 2 things clear. 1, she wasn't just on the periphery of this mess. She was tangled in the cords. And 2, she may have known exactly what he ran from. The building manager at her old place remembered Bresson. Quiet guy, moved out real sudden, took only a suitcase. Which direction? I asked. He pointed. Toward trouble, I think. I was inclined to agree. The question was, how much trouble, and was it still breathing? Back at the brownstone, I laid out the latest breadcrumbs. Wolfe didn't interrupt, which told me he was either fascinated or asleep with his eyes open. Both were possible. Vivian and Bresson weren't just acquaintances, I said. They were more like a discreet footnote in each other's autobiographies. Private, polite, and a little too well-timed. Wolfe closed his eyes. Meaning she helped him vanish, probably kept tabs on him, maybe even hid him, at least for a while. Then why did she die? Wolfe asked without opening his eyes. Because someone found out and sent her a reminder, blue, envelope-shaped, and final. He grunted. And Bresson, I think he's still alive, but if I'm right, he's not where anyone's looking. That earned me a slight nod. Your theory has teeth, albeit unbrushed. Proceed. So I did. I called Saul Panzer. If anyone could chase a ghost without spooking it, it was Saul. I asked him to look for anything tying Bresson to Vivian's finances.
A rental, a medical bill, a library card. Be subtle, I told him. Archie, Saul said, I can be subtle enough to make Fogg nervous. I had a hunch. And Saul
had the legs to chase it. Saul Pantser doesn't believe in luck, just probability dressed in logic. When he called back 4 hours later, I knew the odds had tipped. I got something, he said. Tell me it's not a parking ticket. Trust account, he replied. Opened under the name Lynn Everett. Fake, of course, but the signature matches Bresson's old mortgage paperwork. I cross-checked it. Where's it sending the money? Monthly transfers, always on the 10th. Destination, Golden Pines Nursing Home, Long Island. I whistled. Well, that's either a retirement plan or the best disguise since the Invisible Man. Want me to stake it out? Saul asked. Nope, I said. This one's mine. I want to see if ghosts tip nurses. So while Saul handled the bank trail, I grabbed my coat and pointed my rental at the South Shore. Golden Pines was the kind of place where wallpaper dreams of being exciting. I checked in as a concerned nephew. The front desk bought it. I asked about Lynn Everett. The nurse gave me a bland smile. Oh, he sleeps most days. Doesn't get many visitors. Perfect, I said. Let me surprise him. I was ready for anything, except what I found behind that door. Anthony Bresson was behind a locked door with a name tag that didn't belong to him and sedation levels that would make a bull elephant polite. He was thinner than his photo, ghost pale, eyes sunk so deep you'd think he was practicing for cremation. A nurse let me in, gave me a suspicious glance, and left. Bresson, I said softly. No reaction. I tried again, louder. Nothing. Then I reached into my coat and pulled out a blank blue envelope. That did it. He flinched. The hands that had been resting on the blanket curled like they were gripping an invisible secret. I leaned close. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to end this. But you need to talk, or at least grunt. His lips moved. No sound. I gave him time. After a few long minutes, he turned his head as if it took effort just to see me, and in that moment I realized he hadn't just been hiding, he'd been running from something that broke him. Whatever he knew, it was still killing people. I waited. He blinked, swallowed, and his lips began to form words. Chase, he whispered, and his fingers clenched my sleeve like a lifeline. I leaned in. What about him? Lied. Go on. Forged. My heartbeat paused. My breath didn't. Not suicide. He exhaled with finality, and the words died with the last of his strength. His eyes closed, his fingers slipped from my coat, and he sank back into the pillow like a man who'd finally paid his bill. I stood frozen. Desmond Chase, the philanthropist, the calm one, the quiet backer of Blue Harbor, the only guy who hadn't made a run for it or ended up horizontal. He'd lied. He'd forged something, and he'd covered it with a convenient suicide.
No wonder the envelopes were going out. Someone knew, and they were sending little blue verdicts one by one. I walked out of that room with my stomach doing flips and my brain racing Wolfe to the same conclusion. Vivian knew. That's why she died. Drexler probably knew too. And now we had motive, means, and one whisper from a man who had nothing left to lose. I just hoped Wolfe was hungry, for justice and roast duck, because I had a feast to serve. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was back in the chair, orchid time behind him, and a suspiciously untouched glass of beer sweating on the side table. I knew that look. The man was waiting to be impressed. I found Bresson, I said. Alive? Define alive. But yes. Coherent?
enough to whisper something that might crack this case like a walnut under a steamroller. I gave him the exact words. Wolfe didn't move for 10 seconds. Then he opened his eyes. "Chase," he said, "at last. A name that resonates. He forged something, lied about something, and Russell Keene, not suicide." "Of course not," Wolfe said, his voice silky with satisfaction. "And now we shall act." He rang for Fritz and asked for tea. Not beer. Tea. That's how serious it was. "Archie," he said, "write the invitations, cordial yet firm. We shall host Miss Van, Mr. Chase, and anyone else still standing." "For what? A confession buffet?" "For tea and truth. And should anyone attempt to decline, remind them that we are the last gate before the police." "You expect them all to come?" He smiled. "They'll come, Mr. Goodwin. Guilt is the finest RSVP." He sipped his tea. "Let us set the trap." And just like that, the brownstone became the final chapter. When Wolfe decides to host a tea, it's not for scones and gossip. It's for combustion, preferably polite, but he'll settle for scorching. By the time I'd arranged the chairs in the office like it was Carnegie Hall and not a crime trap, Wolfe had already issued the summons. He never invites people. He summons them, like thunder or taxis. Fritz brought in a silver tray with tea and lemon slices, strictly for decor, because if anyone was relaxed enough to sip anything during what Wolfe had planned, they belonged in a sanitarium. I double-checked the seating. 3 guest chairs, each angled just right to make eye contact with Wolfe, but not with each other. 1 for Marlene Van, poised and perfumed. 1 for Desmond Chase, walking liability. 1 for the wild card. I had a guess who might show. Wolfe hadn't budged from his throne behind the desk, fingers steepled, brow already registering contempt in 4 languages. He looked at me. "Archie, are we prepared?" "We are," I said. "The tea is hot, the suspects are lukewarm, and you're somewhere between thermonuclear and divine wrath." He nodded once. "Let them in." Marlene Van came in first, dressed like she'd just stepped out of a high-end funeral. Flawless black dress, flawless posture, and an expression that said she was above suspicion, boredom, and taxes. She gave me a nod that managed to be both gracious and dismissive. A real talent. Desmond Chase followed, smiling like a man who'd been practicing his innocence in front of a mirror all morning. His tie was too perfect, his eyes too alert. The guy screamed rehearsed. Then came Inspector Kramer, not summoned by Wolfe but apparently unable to resist the scent of blood and ego. He took one look at the setup and growled, "What is this? A parlor game or a courtroom?" Wolfe didn't rise. "It is an inquiry, Inspector. I trust your observational skills remain adequate?" Kramer grunted and planted himself near the fireplace, arms folded like he'd rather be somewhere else, possibly the dentist. I stayed standing, arms crossed. No need to get too comfortable when the room was about to heat up. Wolfe glanced around, nodded once, and cleared his throat. The orchestra was seated. The overture was done. Time for the maestro to begin. Wolfe's voice was calm, sonorous, and sharper than the carving knife Fritz uses on Sunday roast duck. This affair began with a name, Vivian Elrod, a woman of discretion and, alas, poor judgment in confidence. Her death, we are now certain, was not a suicide, nor was Russell Keene's, and the name at the center of their orbit, Anthony Bresson, wasn't missing. He was hidden. Chase shifted in his chair. Marlene didn't blink. Kramer growled something inaudible. Wolfe continued. The capital flowed from Geneva. The investment firm, Blue Harbor, was built on thin air and thick lies. When the air ran out, the lies turned deadly. Miss Elrod received a warning. A blue envelope. Empty.
He paused, as was the fortune she believed she helped conceal. Chase opened his mouth. Wolfe raised a finger. The suicide note left by Mr. Keene was a forgery. It claimed remorse. But Mr. Keene had no such burden, until someone made sure he'd carry it posthumously. Chase swallowed. And someone, Wolfe said, voice lowering like a guillotine, needed these matters buried so deeply that no one would dig. But they did. I did. He sat back, pleased. Now we come to the note. The note that never should have existed. Wolfe opened a manila folder with the delicacy of a surgeon and extracted a sheet of paper. This, he said, is the alleged suicide note of Mr. Russell Keene, purportedly written 2 days before his death. He held it aloft, like Exhibit A in the trial of the century. But it is not his. Handwriting matches, Kramer muttered, but not confidently. Yes, Wolfe agreed, but not the typewriter. Keene owned a 1952 Royal Quiet Deluxe. This was typed on a 1960 Smith Corona. The ribbon used was an aftermarket brand, lighter ink saturation, a detail overlooked by the forger, but not by Mr. Goodwin, who found the ribbon's stub. Kramer gave me a reluctant
nod. I'll be damned.
Unlikely, Wolfe said dryly. You lack the originality. Chase leaned forward. This is absurd. No, Wolfe said. It is precise. Keene never wrote that note. It was crafted to silence questions, to tie a noose around a man already gasping. Whoever typed it made one mistake. Wolfe paused. They thought no one would notice. I noticed Chase's hands were gripping the arms of his chair like they were trying to escape. Wolfe noticed too, and he wasn't done. Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled. Let us consider the envelope. Which one? Kramer barked. There were 2 dozen. Precisely, Wolfe replied. All blank, all meaningless, unless you understand what they truly were. He paused, letting the silence stretch until Chase began visibly twitching. They were bait, each sent to a person with just enough guilt to question whether someone else knew. They contained no threats, no names, no evidence, just potential, and the guilty filled in the rest. Marlene Van finally spoke. So Vivian sent them? No, Wolfe said. She received one and died shortly after, as did Drexler. But the sender, that was someone clever, someone who wanted to see who flinched. Chase stood abruptly. This is preposterous. You have no proof. I don't need proof, Wolfe said. I have you, fidgeting, sweating, rehearsed to the bone, and above all, afraid. Kramer took a step forward. Chase reached for something in his coat. Wolfe didn't move. Archie? Already on it, I said, stepping in fast. But someone else beat me. The flash of silver was fast, faster than Chase's failing judgment. He'd gone for a knife, small but pointed, tucked into the inside of his blazer. The kind of thing cowards carry when courage runs dry. But before I could even curse, Saul Panzer moved. He'd been standing just outside the office door, Wolfe's insurance policy, like a well-placed pawn that turns out to be a queen with brass knuckles. Chase barely cleared the blade from his jacket before Saul's hand locked around his wrist and spun him like a carousel on its last turn. The knife hit the carpet with a thud. Chase hit the wall right after it. Kramer stormed forward. You idiot! Bringing a knife to Wolfe's house is like bringing a match to a dynamite sale. Chase groaned. Wolfe exhaled like the matter had finally cleared the air. I assume, he said, we may dispense with further performance. Saul shrugged. He always looked like the twitchy type. I nodded.
And now he looks like the booked type. Wolfe reached for his beer. "Inspector," he said, "do proceed." Kramer yanked Chase upright, snapped on the cuffs like he was tying a ribbon on a birthday present, and growled, "You're under arrest for murder, fraud, and general stupidity." Chase didn't respond. He was too busy trying to look noble while dripping flop sweat.
"You'll get your statement," Kramer barked at Wolfe, "though I'd prefer a muzzle."
"That," Wolfe said calmly, "is why I write. Less vulgarity." Marlene Van stood, smoothing her skirt. "I assume I'm free to go?" "For now," Kramer muttered. "But don't leave town without packing guilt." She swept out, high heels tapping like punctuation. Saul gave me a wink and slipped back out. No need for applause when you're the guy who ends the third act before the curtain. I gathered the last blue envelope from Wolfe's desk, the one he'd kept sealed. "What's in it?" I asked. "Nothing," Wolfe said, "as it was meant to be." Fritz entered with fresh beer. Wolfe took a sip and sighed like a man who'd just solved a logic puzzle while lounging in Vienna. "Archie," he said, "remind me tomorrow. We need more orange Pico." I nodded. The case was closed. But the tea was excellent. Wolfe, settled into his chair like a Roman emperor waiting for the soup course, lifted a finger to begin. That was his version of a starting pistol. "The blue envelope," he said, "was not merely a curiosity. It was the overture to a symphony of deceit, arranged with deliberate cadence." Kramer rolled his eyes. I didn't blame him. Wolfe hadn't even cleared his throat yet, and we were already knee-deep in metaphor. Wolfe went on. "Anthony Bresson's disappearance was not a vanishing act. It was the silent finale of a financial duet composed by Desmond Chase. Embezzlement laundered through Geneva, silence bought with percentages." Marlene flinched. I gave her credit. First time she'd cracked. "The forged suicide note," Wolfe continued, "was not an afterthought. It was a signature, a final entry in a ledger built on guilt. And the envelope? That was the test. A sterile instrument, meant to provoke." He took a breath and sipped his beer as if he'd just listed his grocery items. Eggs, butter, betrayal, and manslaughter. Chase panicked when someone failed to panic. That, he concluded, was his undoing. And from the look on Kramer's face, he was starting to think we'd all gone nuts. Except Wolfe. Wolfe gestured to the small notepad on his desk, the one I'd fished out of Chase's briefcase before he could lawyer up. "On this list," Wolfe said, "you will find names, not of enemies, but of co-conspirators, people who stood to gain, marginally, if silence prevailed." Kramer squinted. "So?" "So," Wolfe said, "when Miss Elrod received the envelope, it was not an accident. It was Chase's strategy, a psychological scalpel designed to slice through nerves." He tapped the pad. "He sent the envelopes not to cover his tracks, but to see whose shoes left prints. It was not misdelivery. It was entrapment crafted to identify the weak links." I added, "He wanted to see who called first, who cried, who confessed. Instead, he got Wolfe." "Unfortunate for him," Wolfe said mildly. "Fortunate for jurisprudence." Chase didn't respond. He was too busy calculating whether faking madness might still work. Wolfe lifted one eyebrow. "A clever ruse, but flawed. You see, the envelope wasn't blank. It contained intention, and that was enough." Kramer muttered, "Great. Now envelopes have motives." They did, in Wolfe's world, and one of them had just exploded. Wolfe shifted slightly, his version of pacing, and returned to Keen's suicide. "The letter," he said, "was forged not merely in text, but in spirit. It reeked of someone trying to sound remorseful without understanding how remorse actually reads." I nodded. It was like a bad script written by a guy who's only seen guilt in the movies. The ribbon inconsistency, Wolfe continued, was merely the start. The phrasing was stilted, the margins off, and the signature was too perfect. Kramer frowned. How do you get a dead man's signature? You don't, Wolfe said. You trace it from an employment contract. Saul confirmed it. Kramer grunted. So Chase fakes a suicide to tie up the past? Yes, Wolfe said. He had embezzled funds. His partner, Bresson, had vanished. Keane knew enough to implicate him. Elrod suspected the shape of it. They were liabilities. Chase muttered something I chose not to dignify. Wolfe leaned back. Murder is rarely elegant, but this was audacious. A forgery to close a ledger. And Wolfe had just ripped the ledger wide open. His final mistake, Wolfe said, was underestimating my disinterest in panic. I cracked a grin. He tried to bait the wrong man. Wolfe ignored me, naturally. The envelope addressed to this office was not coincidence. It was a provocation. Chase assumed any recipient would panic, would inquire, would incriminate. He figured we'd flinch, I said. He'd read the name Nero Wolfe and expected a man like him, jumpy, proud, and stupid. Indeed, Wolfe said dryly. Instead, I read the list. Not with dread, but with focus. And I noted whose names did not appear. That absence was louder than the list itself. Kramer looked like someone had just explained poetry using a jackhammer. So, you reversed the trap? Yes, Wolfe said. By making it appear that we had evidence we lacked, I flushed Mr. Chase into confession, not from fear, but from the need to control the narrative. I said, so we played the game backward. No, Wolfe corrected. We played it better. And the score, so far, was Wolfe 1, Chase 0. Kramer stomped over, cuffs already clinking in his pocket. I don't like being used, Wolfe. You weren't, Wolfe said. You were informed. A rare, but not unpleasant distinction. Next time, Kramer growled, just call me when someone bleeds. Wolfe sighed. I shall endeavour to accommodate. I watched Chase get hauled away like yesterday's fish, still too shocked to resist. Say what you want about Kramer. He's got a gift for handcuffing self-righteousness. When the door closed, Wolfe rang for Fritz. The tray arrived with precision. Beer, cheese straws, and the kind of smug silence only a man like Wolfe can steep in. You're welcome, I said. You are recompensed, Wolfe replied. Your paycheck, as ever, remains unjustifiably intact. I saluted with my glass. To blank envelopes and full prisons, he didn't respond. Just sipped and stared at the orchids like they might start applauding. Me? I headed to my desk and opened the file labelled The Blue Envelope. Time to add the final report. And if I accidentally wrote, I told you so, in the margin, well, nobody's perfect. After the stationery stunt, Wolfe hadn't set foot outside in days. Not that he was ever a frequent traveller, but this sealed it. Fritz had become the designated supplier of all things papery. Envelopes, notepads, fountain pen ink. Anything vaguely reminiscent of the case now came with strict delivery protocol and Fritz's culinary flair. I do not trust the neighbourhood stationers, Wolfe declared one morning over breakfast. Fritz, ever the diplomat, merely said, Then I shall go myself, after lunch. That was fine by me. I didn't want Wolfe within 10 feet of a paper aisle again. Last time he got near one, someone died. Should I also replace the carbon paper? Fritz asked. Replace it, burn it, bury it, I muttered. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. Your levity is disproportionate. Maybe, I said, but in this joint, envelopes are weapons now. He grunted and returned to his trout omelette, and I made a silent vow. Next case, let it be poison. At least it doesn't require postage. I closed the file, snapped the folder shut, and gave it the ceremonial place in the cabinet. Top drawer, right side, alphabetical under blue. It sat between the blood orange scandal and brass knuckles in May. That felt right. Wolfe was reading Montaigne in the office. Fritz was icing a cake. Saul was off the grid. And me? I had a sharpened pencil and a clean notepad. But something stuck. A blue envelope. Blank. Nothing inside. And yet it had taken down a killer, revealed embezzlement across 3 continents, and nearly earned me a knife in the spleen. Not bad for office supplies. I jotted down a final note on the case. Some letters are written in ink, others in silence. This one was all silence, until Wolfe read it out loud. Then I leaned back, hands behind my head. Case closed, drawer locked. And if the next murder comes via paperclip, I'll be ready, long as it doesn't involve mimeographs. Wolfe hates mimeographs. Justice, when it finally arrives, rarely wears a uniform. Sometimes it comes in the shape of a quiet deduction, or a blue envelope that was never meant to be read. In the end, a man's downfall wasn't ink or poison. It was pride, disguised as precision. Wolfe never raised his voice, but every word struck like a gavel. Would you have seen through the trap, or stepped into it, thinking you were the one holding the pen? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed the mystery, be sure to like the video, share it with someone who loves detective stories, and subscribe for more. Not every case ends with applause, but the truth, once found, always echoes.